Whether you get your film scanned at the local lab or you do it at home, one thing is for sure. It's tricky, it can be expensive, and a lot of the time, our scans can come out kind of disappointing. Okay, that's 3 things, but the good news is there's a solution. But before we can press the fix everything immediately button, we need to understand where the problem is coming from. We need to accept that it is, just maybe, a little bit of a skill issue. And although we really don't need to spend any more money on gear, we probably will. Film photographers usually have a bit of a love-hate relationship with their photo labs. On the one hand, they're keeping film alive. They always have new, exciting, fresh film in the fridge, and the whole place smells like Fixer. On the other hand, they take all of your money, they see all of your rubbish photos, and sometimes they just don't scan our photos very well. Lab scans have been the bane of my existence ever since I started shooting film as a teenager, because unfortunately, the first lab I ever went to was run by an absolute artistic genius who was himself one with the scanner. Since then, I've been chasing the perfect scan dragon, and I've had my fair share of really bad ones. Plus, sometimes lab scans aren't bad per se, they're just not quite what we had in mind, like the Neon Genesis Evangelion movie. Or sometimes they just take too long, or sometimes they just cost too much. And on top of all of that, don't forget that scanning is a part of the art making process, and you are giving up a little bit of creative control when you outsource it. You might have taken photos with a soft, dreamy Portra 400 on Reddit kind of aesthetic in mind, but the lab might inject loads of contrast into them. Neither option is wrong, but this is definitely a very different photo to this. And sure, you could get your scans from the lab in a TIFF file, but that costs even more money, and a lot of the time the way that they scan the film can still bake in a certain look, a certain amount of sharpening, and a certain texture. So we should scan all of our film at home, right? Let's just see how much these lab scanners cost. Oh. Home scanning up until now has been a bit of a compromise. Okay, a lot of a compromise. Flatbed scanners can produce amazing quality scans, but that takes a lot of time, effort, and skill. For those of us who aren't Nick Carver, it can be really frustrating to get good results, especially if you're scanning 35mm and if you're in a hurry. I used to do all of my scanning on an Epson V550, and I would stay up late before work the next day scanning for hours. It was pretty slow. It took me about 40 minutes to scan in one roll of film, and that's not including the time I spent editing and cropping everything. For my black and white work, this was okay for a while, but the color scans were always a bit disappointing, and it just wasn't up to my elitist #grain is good film bro standards. If you also own a beanie and a camera that's older than you, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel so we can hang out and talk about photography more often. See, if you have one photo that you want to scan really carefully with special wet mounting stuff and do the whole fine art printing thing, then flatbeds are okay. But if you're scanning 3 rolls of HP5 a day, every day, like I was, it gets pretty frustrating pretty quickly. So I started to look at dedicated film scanners, like, the old Nikon Coolscans or some of the Plus Tech ones. And they're pretty good, but there was just always something that held me back from pulling the trigger. Those old Nikon Coolscans are really cool, and they're really good at scanning. They're also really expensive and really old and require some extra level of techno-necromancy to keep going. For some of them, I would have needed a whole extra old iMac just dedicated to film scanning, or the world's most ridiculous daisy chain of adapters. And if anything on a Nikon Coolscan breaks, the luckiest situation is that you are going to need a friend with a 3D printer, and at worst, it could just be bricked. I don't know why, but I really avoided DSLR scanning for the longest time. I just thought it was a bit weird, to scan my analog film with a digital camera, until I realized that actually scanners are also just digital cameras in a box. I also, for some reason, I had this idea in my mind that it wouldn't be good quality, or that it would be kind of a compromise. I think a lot of the time we can get so carried away looking at the fancy solutions that the ones right in front of us start to look like a bad idea, even when they just aren't. Anyway, here's a lab scan from a Noritsu that costs more than my first car did. And here's my rescan that I did at home. So yeah, it works. Here's my current setup. Let me show you what I'm using and why. I'll walk you through a scan and then I'll show you a party trick or two. As always, everything I'll be using is linked in the video description. Right below, a link to download one of my photography zines for free if you want. First of all, the camera. This is my Nikon Z6 III, which is what I'm using because it's what I've got. But don't for a second make the same mistake I did and say, this guy's out of touch. My Micro Four Thirds from Olympus is never going to be able to compete, because it totally can compete. Because the truth is, a lot of people use small sensor cameras, older DSLRs, and get really great results out of camera scanning. Attached to the Z, I'm using the Nikkor 55mm f2.8 micro, which is the annoying Nikon way of saying macro lens. And even though technically micro is like more correct, it just annoys me. I'm using this extension tube as well. This is so I can make sure that the negative is taking up as much space as possible in the frame so that I can get the most amount of resolution out of each scan. Also, dead serious, this, one of the best $15 purchases of my life. This is a remote shutter for the camera and I use it way more than I thought I would. Absolutely worth it. You can even half press it to focus. All of that works. And all of that is attached to this. This is called a copy stand and it's okay. But the adjusty uppy downy process isn't the best because this plastic adapter for the camera is slightly flexible, and so there's always a little bit of give to it. You can use a tripod that just points down, or you can go really crazy and get one of those like jumbo studio stands if you want, but for me this is okay for now. Under that, this is where the magic happens. This is the Veloy 360 system. They aren't sponsoring this video, but I did chat to them about it because I had some questions, so they've given me a discount link for you in the description. Essentially, what's going on here is that we have a light source, the Cinestill one, under a tray that supports the film. Negatives go through here, this holder makes sure it's flat, and then these little rollers at the end pull the film through. With this setup, I can scan a whole roll of 35mm film in like 3 minutes. Not even kidding, I was shocked at how quick and easy it is. But before we can look at the scans and see what we can do with them, there is, as always, a catch. You do need to spend a solid 10 to 15 minutes before you start scanning, making sure that everything is set up perfectly. First, you need to make sure that the film bed here is level. You do this with a mirror. You have to like make sure that the middle of the lens is in the middle of the frame, and that sounds easy, but it takes quite a lot of fiddly tweaking. Then you need to nail critical focus on the film. This is also a lot harder than it sounds, at least it is for me in my setup. I have to lock the lens at close focus and then rack it up and down the copy stand for focus, and since it's not the best stand, it can be pretty frustrating. I think that this is the worst part of my whole setup, and it's probably my fault for being cheap and not getting a beefier stand. There are also camera scanning kits that don't need a copy stand, which is quite possibly a very good idea if you don't need the ultimate flexibility of being able to scan any film format like I do. Once you've done that, you really need to make sure that there's no stray light hitting the film because it can cause reflections and weirdness. Personally, I usually do my scans like completely in the dark, like a vampire, but that doesn't really lend itself perfectly to YouTube videos, so I'll be doing these demo scans with the lights on. All you need to do then is just feed the film through the 360 and snap away. Kind of. A few pro tips for you. Number one, make sure that you focus on the film with the lens wide open so you can really nail it. But then it's usually best to stop down to around f5.6 or f8 for the best results. I like to do all of my scanning at ISO 100, and then I use the shutter speed to expose the negative as bright as I can get it without clipping anything. That way I can bring the exposure back down in post and keep as much information in the shadows as possible. Also, this Cinestill light has a few different options for color temperature. There's a slightly cooler light for scanning negative film, which I've found works really well at reducing the tint that you often get from the orange base. But Hunter, you're saying, now you've just got loads of pictures of negatives. That's not very useful, is it? Correct. We'll need to convert these to positives in Lightroom. I use Negative Lab Pro since I have been for like half a decade at this point, but there's lots of different software that does it, including doing it manually with the Curves tool. If you're a sociopath. I like Negative Lab Pro because one of the cool things it does is you can just batch convert an entire roll in one go, and then you can go back, open up each image, and fiddle around with things like color and sharpening. Speaking of fiddling, this is how I do mine with the help of today's video sponsor, Ulanzi. I don't like it when too much of the art making has to happen on a screen. So a way that I try to make it feel a little bit different from what you would do at an office job and a little bit more like, I don't know, flying a spaceship, is with these. This is the Ulanzi Creative Deck, and this is the Ulanzi Dial. These are controllers for the computer, and they just make it feel so much more like a real scanning workstation than a jerry-rigged laptop situation. The Creative Deck has loads of ports for all of your favorite flavors of cable, as well as slots for your SD cards, a headphone jack, and HDMI. It's also got all of these customizable buttons that are actually quite useful when I don't want to be reaching across all of my freshly dusted film to fiddle with the laptop. It's got knobs too. I use these for things like volume and brightness, but you can also use them to scroll the timeline in your video editing software. And then the dial, which you can do loads with, but I mostly use it as a giant satisfying scroll wheel for my entire Lightroom catalog. It's also got a whole load of very clicky and very customizable buttons. For example, I map a lot of these to my keyboard shortcuts for film scanning, so I can hit one button and open up Negative Lab Pro. Check them out using the links in the video description. A big thank you to the team over at Ulanzi and to you for supporting what I do. But Hunter, how do the scans actually look? Are they good? I think so. Here's an example. This is Kodak Gold and 35mm scanned on the Z6 III. I think it looks good. Ah, but wait, he said. There's more. There's a few really cool tricks that this setup has under its sleeves, and number one is pixel shift. Basically, a lot of mirrorless cameras, including this one, have the ability to move the sensor like 1 pixel across, and 1 pixel up, and 1 pixel down. And so if we took like, I don't know, 8 or 16 or 32 shots, we could combine them all into one giant shot. Yeah, this is a regular 24 megapixel scan, about 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. This is 100% crop of that scan. This is the same shot scanned using pixel shift. Looks about the same to me. Oh, that's 100% crop of this 12,000 pixel long image. Anyone who thinks that that won't print as big as you could possibly imagine, come fight about it with me in the comments. Pixel shift shooting does take a little bit longer, and it can be a little bit of a pain to do the round trip between the Nikon stitching software and then back to Lightroom. But if I'm gonna use a photo for something serious, if I'm gonna print it, or if it's going on merch or something, then I'm absolutely using pixel shift. I'm actually really impressed with these. I thought this was going to be a complete gimmick. Another cool trick is scanning with borders. You can swap out these film holders. This is the regular 35mm one. This one is for 6x7 medium format, and this one is for scanning sprocket holes. I know that this is like a trendy Instagram coded thing to do, but I don't care, to be honest. I think it looks absolutely sick. I really love how full width scans look, and I'm still experimenting with them. I think it would be really cool to get an even bigger light source and scan whole rolls as digital contact sheets. Here's a few more examples of shots that I've scanned at home that I've been pretty happy with. But now, after all of that, you're probably still sat there thinking, okay, but my scans still suck. Yeah, same. That was my biggest takeaway from all of this. If your film scans suck, it's probably because of one of two things. Number one is that you don't have control over the process. Scanning your film yourself at home fixes that. But number two, the sneaky one, I wasn't that good at the process after I took control of it. Editing photos is quite hard at the best of times, and when you're editing film scans, that's just another layer of complexity that you're adding on top of it. Or it's like another 5 or 6 layers of complexity. Aside from the actual editing being more difficult, one thing I've personally really struggled with is keeping my original vision in mind when I'm doing the edits. It's really easy to get stuck to a certain look that Negative Lab Pro spits out, or something that looks cool but not really the way that I wanted it to. I take a lot of inspiration for the look of my images from movies, so a lot of the time I'll have Shot Deck or something, or a movie open in a new tab, so that I can switch back and forth and reference things like contrast levels, colors, tints. It's taken loads of practice, literally like nearly a decade of editing photos and months of fiddling with this specific setup, but I'm finally at a place where I'm kind of happy with how my film scans are looking. And that's the big important takeaway. You do not need a FlexTight or like a NASA drum scanner to get great film scans. You probably just need to spend a few more hours testing things, messing about in Lightroom, and experimenting. And after all of that, after you've done all that experimenting, you might be sat in front of your computer with a fantastic scan of a boring photo. Don't worry, it's only a little bit your fault, and I'll teach you how to take more interesting photos when you watch this video next. Stay hydrated, and create art.